Hello, YouTube. Hello, YouTube friends. Hello, the swamp out there. The swamp. Anyway, have you ever reflected or thought about, this is something I brought up before, have you ever thought about the fact that so much of our time is spent thinking about someone else's position, whether it's an opinion, whether it's fact, whether it's whatever notions of existence and reality might be presented. It's generally speaking someone else's story. And within the scheme of things, this is something that happens as an interchange and exchange, something that someone else has learned and passes it on to me. But there is a subtlety here that needs to be distinguished from something that's valuable to me and something that is just used in order to keep me preoccupied. In other words, it may not be of real value to me to know something if it doesn't make my life better, a more enriched life. Over the course of my existence, there is within me a desire to improve myself, to improve that which is what I understand about everything around me and everything inside of me, whatever that is, that distinction. This is a whole other probably dissertation on what is outside, what is inside. We take it for granted that we have an inner world, but it's largely supplanted by stories that exist outside. And this is something I'd like to just reiterate again, something I think about, something that others may feel inclined to think about, in the sense that I want to be a better person in my life, the way someone I regard highly also would want to feel that they're improving their lives and not just regurgitating the same old, the insane level of storytelling that really has no value to me personally. I'm going to just introduce a character that I'm revisiting. I had come across him before, but there is a pertinence now. I understand a little bit more. A fellow that was the father, in a sense, they call him, with Michel Foucault. And he wrote, and Derrida would probably fit into this category as well. I kind of appreciate Derrida a little bit more because he is, in a sense, what is called deconstruction. He is eliminating all what appears to be the superficial stories that have mounted up in our lives, largely based on language. I think he's someone that is fundamentally aware of what it means to communicate through language, and he's a deconstructionist in the sense that he wants to understand what a word is. And I don't want to deviate too much into this other than the Foucault notion as a painter. I make paintings. I'm an artist. I'm living in an age that is considered postmodern, the most decrepit, degenerate age, I suspect, ever in the history of ages, including the barbarians and the Romans and the entire bunch before, because it has escalated through technology into a level of depravity and blindness within our circumstances that have removed that which I understand to be my story from the conversation, largely speaking. Now, everyone is not comfortable or capable of developing their story, but at the same time, everyone is capable of eliminating the dross out of our day-to-day life. You don't have to be a painter, an artistic, creative individual on that level in order to be able to benefit from that which is of value to us. We don't have to be the progenitors of the story, although I have an extremely high regard in art history, in history in general, of people that contribute to my life by telling their story that is not tied into what I find myself offended by, the manipulation by this is a somewhat amorphous reality out there, a group run by the backroom boys since the inception of what is considered to be history 6,000 years ago. And I'll refer to Foucault, who wrote a book, a treatise, Madness and Civilization. And I would alter this title to Civilization is Madness. And of course, he's a voice for the man, because if you go into his life, he died a miserable life based on excessive physical toxicities. He absorbed so many toxic elements into his body. How could his mind actually function in the sense that it would reflect some value or benefit to the way I feel as a human being alive, existing at this time? I am not interested in the toxic ruminations of a degenerate like Foucault. He does, however, point out the nature of our reality from the point of view of his or their story, which is something I have always brought up in my dissertations. Something that is essential for us to have a chance to, in a sense, alter our course collectively, that we're captured by certain, well, what I've referred to again as spectacle, that there is an element that we are drawn towards like moths to a light, that we are actually very absorbed by spectacle because we have not been able, personally and collectively, to do the inner work that ties us to, I suppose, a more wholesome perception of our reality through a story that truly makes sense. And when I talk about this, why I feel compelled to talk about this and what I've understood in my own life and my own work, that since this nuclear plant called Fukushima has blown up, this has altered our existence at this time irrevocably. This is not something that is just another event, the way Alex Jones was slotting in discussions about Fukushima as just another event that would exalt his nature, his brutal nature. On the tube in public, people were paying attention like, oh, really close. Oh, Alex, what's Alex saying today? He used it as spectacle for his own propagation. Anyway, my dissertations, my thoughts, my reflections have altered drastically since March 11, 2011, because I've understood something in this. And I have built my own story on this event. Now, this is something that happened externally. This is something I'm aware of that is of such significance that I pay attention to that event. It is part of actually their story. What civilization, a mad, insane conception, at its very core, at its very root, civilization is madness, not civilization and madness. It's an anomaly to say and madness, because civilization is madness, the way it is experienced and practiced. And I want to put forward, this is something put forward on a consistent basis. When I make my commentary, I want to highlight certain feelings and ideas that I have that are very close to what I perceive to be my story, which I tell through the work I do. When you look behind me and you see images, these constitute what I consider to be my story. Can you see? Okay, I'm getting prepared for an exhibit in Toronto. So this is my story based on what are the astronauts, NOT, the astronauts. And I'm going to say this, people that obviously listen to me have heard me say this before, but it cannot be expressed enough. And I feel myself to be possibly of help to people that are struggling on the periphery of taking themselves seriously on something that is so important. Not to say that people understand the severity of this event, but also as an a priori that we have within us the ability to counter. This is a belief I suppose I have. We have an ability within us to counter the enormous challenge and negativity that is facing us at this time. I still have this sense, I suppose it's a kind of faith, almost blind faith, considering that this is a steamroller, what is happening technologically, the subversion, the degenerates who have actually assaulted us in a major, we are under a major attack and assault. All of life is under attack. So what I am formulating is a strategy through what I understand to be my story. I'm aware of things going on, but fundamentally I'm aware mostly of what it is that percolates within me every day. And this cannot be the smallest part of my day-to-day life is crucial in order to feel comfortable with weeding out all the dross and the bullshit that happens around us, from political stories to monumental environment events. Whatever the story it is that we are attracted to needs to be filtered through an inner sense. And here's what I've always come back to, that we do not have a viable story without building on our conscience. The thing is to do the right thing. It seems like a simple thing to say. I say it over and over. And it's not a question of bludgeoning anyone with the facts, because the facts are an internal matter, not an external. So I'm going to synopsize this from the point of view that in order to succeed, in order to have some kind of impact other than just breathing and then dying and going away, there is a feeling. The reason we're alive is because we want to actually impact through this aspect of us as humans, that we can do the right thing. We want to impact, not just live a better life for ourselves, but impact the lives and life of all beings out there in a way that is, I suppose, sustainable, or something that makes me feel better about myself. And I'm different. I see myself very distinct and different from many other artists. I would say most artists do not have this sensibility the way I feel it. I'm not coming across it very often. That see the work not as a kind of absolute necessity, but more tied to a very personal growth. In other words, when we look at art in a critical way, and we try to understand what we're confronted just through a kind of mental critical process, we lose a connection to the work through what is actually more important, which is the intimacy and the immediacy of what it is we're experiencing. And it's not something that goes to the brain. This is when I bring up Derrida. He understood this in a deconstructive way, which, by the way, was already practiced by Kabbalists way back when, however far. He just regurgitated in his own words, and I suppose it's valuable. And his good buddy, I don't know if they were buddies, but Foucault basically took the Crowley path of do as thou wilt. This is postmodernism on steroids. That do as thou wilt Foucault philosophy, who died miserably, horribly, they called it AIDS. It was basically, yes, his immune system collapsed. There was a systemic breakdown in his immune system, and they put the label of AIDS on it. But that's such a a flawed assessment of what it means to be sick. Yes, the immune system is overcome by all the toxicities that he introduced to his body through his degenerate lifestyle in San Francisco, where he was romping through the neighborhood with chains and garter belts and leathers and abusive whatever. Yeah, it's disgusting. It's sickening. The point I'm making, what I'm hoping to be able to articulate to the few people that have a sense of this personal story, something that happens within inside each of us that actually can make a huge difference, even from just the point of eliminating their story, which is so not helpful to be focused on that. And I find a lot of YouTubers that I actually appreciate cannot or don't seem to be able to transition in this within this concept. I see people continuously regurgitating the events that are happening outside. Yes, things are happening, shit's happening big time, but there is no point in focusing on this without having that inner filter, what I call conscience, to change your own lives, that will have a ripple effect into the world in general. Do you see my thinking here? I keep coming back to this. And the only way I personally have been able to find what sustains me in making work, even though in the scheme of things, when you compare yourself, if you're an artist and you compare yourself to the icons within this culture that are held up as being visionaries, I would say, generally speaking, for the most part, with the exception of a few, I have some artists, Kendridge, I love Kendridge, a South African artist, or even Anselm Kiefer, he's a bit on the fringe for me, but even somebody like Anselm Kiefer, who makes epic paintings, that when you're confronted by these objects, they are just so unnerving. That in itself is an enormous story, and I think he's still giving voice to the man on some level, but the impact is so powerful, it rattled me into a kind of a self-reflection that actually helped me. So I've just named these two artists for anyone who wants to, William Kendridge and Anselm Kiefer. But generally speaking, the people that are held up for us are not of importance or significance for the most part for me, because they're regurgitations of a story that's been told many times and it's not helping. So even within the sense of originality, there may be some form. I think that originality can easily be confused with spectacle, so we tend to associate ourselves, or we tend to be overwhelmed by something that may feel to us to be original, but it's anything but. And I think there is an importance within what is conceived of original. It's difficult to understand this concept because really there is nothing new out there in terms of what we can express. It's all been experienced and expressed, maybe not personally, but within a kind of cumulative way. I think everything has been said and expressed in some version or other. So what is it that I'm struggling with when I'm making my own work? How is it that I see myself contributing? And this is what I come back to. I make my work out of the sense of doing the right thing within a history, within an idea of having come through a history, people that have influenced me, but now it is brought forth through my own sense of having grown up. I'm growing up. I hope to be able to grow up more before I leave this mortal coil, this bag of blood. And I'm reflecting on this. I make my YouTubes with the idea, and that because I come across people all the time who haven't connected to this fundamental aspect of ourselves. If I felt most people have, I wouldn't open my trap and I just make my paintings to confirm that which you already know, I suppose, but I don't see it happening. I'm not sure how my work would look if I felt that everybody has this awareness that I have. And I guess, what am I going to say after that? What am I going to say? I guess I'll sit on a rock, or I'll lie on the beach and drink pina coladas like the avant-garde. Because they've said it all. They're lying on the beaches drinking pina coladas because they're so enlightened with their originality, they don't have to say anything more. And maybe that's what will happen if I reach this point of awareness that all around me, people have gravitated towards this sense of conscience and are doing the right thing every day and telling their own story instead of listening to everybody else, and then combining to form a collective story. And I suppose that would be their story, but it's collective, so it's my story is their story. We got to tell our story. We got to learn, if not tell our own story, to identify the stories that are of value and significance, not the spectacle. The Foucault and the Rita spectacles, the Damien Hirst spectacles, the culture as a whole spectacle, civilization is madness spectacle. So what they call postmodern is fundamentally an abdication of our responsibility as mindful, thoughtful people, and we've accepted everything that they've told us. That's postmodernism in my mind. And people that are propagating high-mindedness, like deep reflections on what our situation is, it's very simple. We have abdicated our responsibility to everyone but ourselves. And that's postmodernism. That's my definition of postmodernism. And you may say, and this is probably more of a critical side, why hasn't there been a major art movement? There have been pockets, highlights, like I said, Kendrick and Kiefer, but they're not art movements per se. They are able to express themselves in such a unique and original way that feels basically, I suppose, original individual, but this is not an art movement per se. Like when we reflect on the art of the past, we have what is called pop art, and we're still under the influence of this monster that should have lasted maybe 6 months, and we reflect back on and say, oh, that was kind of interesting, like the Warhol phenomenon. The banality of existence is exalted. So anyway, I think I'll end it here with my definition of what is postmodern, and Foucault's civilization and madness is an erroneous term. It's civilization is madness, or madness and civilization, what he called it. So in order for us to counter the trend, at this time, this is pivotal. And I relate to people. I'm engaged with people. I have great regard for people that are kind and generous, even though they are, for me, they're not fulfilling their potential by connecting to this fundamental awareness of what it is that we personally can contribute. And I think it's important to know what it is that you have, like to reflect on ourselves and say, this is what I'm doing. I mean, it doesn't mean you're always going to figure out exactly. It's like I make a painting and 10 years later I say, oh, geez, I did something here I wasn't aware I was doing. So, but to be within this sense of intuition and impulse is very important, but also to reflect on it and say to ourselves, what does this mean? In every regard. And I make my paintings, I make my work with this impulse intact, with this intuition as best as I can, however that we conjure this. We have our little ways of conjuring things for ourselves. We have our rituals even, maybe. Sometimes a scotch and a cigar goes a long way. It may not be the best way to do it, but it helps sometimes. So whatever that is that conjures and gives us this strength, this conviction to move toward a resolution at this particular time. And we are in perilous times. We are in perilous times. I will say this as well. We are in perilous times. And all all the renegades of their version of the Jim Sinclairs, the gold people, and the politicians that stand on the pulpits. And apparently this, what's the guy, Kane? No, not McCain, died. Into the abyss with these people, because they have contributed zero to our well-being. So all these politicians, all these high-minded profile people that contribute nothing to my life, good riddance. I mean, it's maybe a little cruel to say this, but when you're being punished by this madness every day in some version or other, with these warmongering bastards that keep collecting the slave labor money and contributing to the industries that are destroying us. And now I'm telling their story again. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Hope this makes sense again. And I will continue to post, and I will continue to support the people that represent to me the alternative to the madness, to this culture, what I call the culture of death, and civilization as a whole is madness. And postmodernism is the child, is the love child of civilization. Postmodernism is the love child of civilization.